Okay, welcome to the afternoon sessions of Region 2 SBJ's conference. We've got two sessions going on now. This one is called Giving Voice to the Voiceless. We're gonna have two storytellers with us here, one in person and one on the screen. Lovey Cooper and Sundra Hominik. They're talking about how individual journalists can do a better job of finding untold stories in communities that are too often overlooked. It's appropriate that we're doing it, I think, right now, because this is the end of SPJ's annual ethics week. And our code of ethics say, under the principle of seek truth and report it, give voice to the voiceless. And how do you do that? And why should you do that? I think is an interesting kind of question. I got reading some things by Ali Cologne, who's at Washington and Lee, about how the voiceless have a voice. A journalist's job is to amplify it. And what I wanted to do is kind of get these people, both of you, to tell stories and how you get stories. We can go off into some other kind of aspects of that with questions, but if you will just start and tell what you do and how you do it. And then I think later we can talk more about first how and then maybe why.
Sure. Yeah, I can start. Hi, everyone. My name is Lovey Cooper. I'm the managing editor of Scalawag. We're a small nonprofit media organization based in Durham, North Carolina, that produces journalism and storytelling about the South as a whole. We aim to tell stories that disrupt and shift kind of dominant narratives about the South. And we do that by working in solidarity with oppressed communities. So I think that's especially pertinent to the conversation today. And we also do that, we present our work through a Black, queer, feminist lens that's kind of rooted in Southern freedom struggles and the rich tradition that comes with that. And I think that lens in and of itself encompasses a lot of what more traditional news outlets try to do in hindsight through diversity and equity and inclusion initiatives. And yeah, we publish, traditional written reporting, we publish personal essays, art, poetry, media commentary. It's all about the South. And we started out as a quarterly print magazine and shifted our content to online only in 2020. And yeah, I'll leave it at that for intros.
I feel like I should turn around and look at Sandra. Would tell a little about some of your experiences? You have a variety of experiences, Sandra. I'd like people to hear about them.
Hi. Yes, thanks for having me. I have, I'm going to say this and I'm proud of it, 40 years of experience in communication. I started in broadcast journalism, actually in my hometown of Knoxville, Tennessee. And when I went to college to get a degree, I switched to print. So I have worked in broadcast, print, digital, and probably, I meant to add it up, but I probably worked in about 12 different states, 12 different news organizations. And I'm currently the senior editor of partnerships with the Chronicle of Philanthropy. A lot of you all probably never heard of it. It's a magazine, a national magazine. And I joined that organization because they are doing a project that I'm very committed to, and that is telling the stories about people who give, people who receive the help, and whether that's what really the way the help needs to be received and given. It's about letting people in their various communities have a voice in how that money is given and used. And so it's a project in cooperation with Associated Press. I also, I'm based here in right outside of Richmond now, because I came to work at the Richmond Times-Dispatch about 15 years ago. And at about 4 or 5 years in, my position was eliminated. I wanted to stay in the Richmond area. And so I created an adventure that has morphed into a nonprofit called In Your Shoes Media. And my goal there was to help some of the regional and local newspapers who couldn't afford or didn't have the ability to do storytelling through video. And so I worked with a number of local papers to do video storytelling. and in fact, did a 6-month special series called Virginia Tapestry. And Virginia Tapestry was basically just that, looking at the rich tapestry diversity in Virginia. And so that's some of what I've done. And I'm sure some of more will be revealed as we go forward.
Oh, great, thank you. One of the things I found interesting when I started thinking about doing this panel is I recall that there was a story some years ago about pundits and how we go to the same sources over and over. I think they interviewed somebody from the Brookings Institute about being interviewed too often. And there's a follow-up that I think was done by American Journalism Review some years ago that talked about Larry Sabato and how often he's quoted, and how some editors have kind of an unofficial rule not to talk to Larry, apparently. But what interested me is that out of the need for deadline pressure or possibly laziness, we go back to the same sources so often. And we've got the old Rolodex idea. And I want to know how to get out and to find more sources. How do you really do community kinds of things, particularly with people who are doing the reporting who don't necessarily have the time? What are some of the ways to reach communities and not just get the most obvious quotes?
Yeah, yeah, I would say so. For Scalawag, most of our traditional reporting is based on the idea of producing news that's grounded in the experience of oppressed people. So that's kind of like the overarching goal of everything that we do. And that means our editorial vision is very much driven by the communities that we're trying to serve.
Mm-hmm.
So that kind of, I think, sets us on a higher playing field from the get, right, with the types of stories that we're being pitched and the types of people that want to work with us. We're trying to center queer folks, people of color, working class folks, poor folks in all of our work, and really focused on telling stories that accurately reflect their lives, right? I think what holds a lot of journalists back from telling more diverse stories or reaching more diverse sources is that they're scared of alienating their audiences. But in our experience, what really alienates readers is the exact opposite, what you're talking about, where things are overly wonky, overly policy heavy, or they don't have a checkpoint to where an everyday reader can kind of plug in and see, this is how this applies to me, right? And you want to make sure that what you're sharing is actionable at the end of the day. We saw that a lot with, COVID reporting over the last couple of years. There's all these new numbers and stats and protocols, and you're just being kind of handed this laundry list of policies, and you have no clue. Okay, what does that mean for my kid who has to go to school? What does that mean for my job? How many sick days do I have left with that? And so, when folks are confronted with information that they don't understand or they don't have a framework to understand, that's when they start shutting it out, and that leaves a hole for other voicier, maybe less data driven, less fact driven media to come in. And so I think the biggest thing from the start is thinking, based on who I'm writing for, what kind of voices are they going to trust? They have different markers of trust than I as a journalist do going into this.
I like voicier, the idea that there are other voicier groups kind of out there that may be pushing it, kind of trying to fill this hole.
Yeah.
What do you think, Sandra, about finding sources and reaching out beyond the usual ones that you do to be able to get more voices involved?
Right. I want to pick up a little bit on the voicier thing and throw out something that I think is a truth. A wise, it kind of a different twist on today's topic, but a wise journalist I once read said, people in overlooked communities are not voiceless. It's just that news organizations don't often give them the opportunity to share their voices. So we all have stories, people from all ethnic backgrounds, socioeconomic classes, religions, genders, generations. We all have stories to share. And so our job as good journalists, as smart journalists, is to really give people the opportunity to share those voices. And I like to think of the best way to find untold stories in the community, well, there are a lot of ways, but I jotted down three that I really wanted to mention. And is first of all, you got to go to the communities. You've got to be in those communities and get to know the people there before there's a breaking news story. Don't wait until you have to go interview someone's mom because the young man was just killed in a gun fight. Don't wait till a tornado descends on a part of your community that was hit by a tornado that is known to be more a lower income community. Get out there and know these people so they're not just sources, know them as people. When you go out there, you've got to listen and you got to learn. Find out from the people who live there, what do they want to tell stories about? What issues are important to them? And I do think, as Lovey said, you do have to draw on your lived experiences, you and then lived experiences of your colleagues and your coworkers. Hopefully, if you're not a person of color, if you're not queer, if you're not someone with a disability, hopefully there's someone in your office who has that lived experience and they can help you begin to connect with some of those communities. So you have to do the work to get to it. Obviously I have a connection with the Black community. I grew up and it started out in public housing and lived in East Tennessee up until I was 18. So I draw on the Black community for stories. It's something that I do. And I work with my reporters to do that. But here in Richmond, Virginia, as in many regions throughout the South, the region 2, there's a large Native American community. In fact, I live just a few miles from where Pocahontas was born. So as I did that Virginia Tapestry series, my reporting would have been very incomplete if I had not shared some stories from that community. So I had attended various events, festivals, the annual powwow that we all go to, and there's nothing wrong with that. But I had been going through those and I started meeting members of various tribes. And through those contacts, I ended up meeting a woman named Jessica Stewart. And she is a member of the Chickahominy tribe here in the eastern part of Eastern Henrico, which is just east of Richmond. And as I started talking with her for the story, she said something that really hit me, that really kind of speaks to what our topic is. She says, often people say to her, you're not Indian, you're from somewhere else, you're Middle Eastern, or you're this. Indians don't live here anymore. It's like, wow. But what she told me reminds me that other people really do need to be reminded of the communities, and that's how we connect. So I was thrilled to share part of her story. If you want to see it, you can see her video story and others on my website, inyourshoesmedia.org, inyourshoesmedia.org. And then the series that I talked about, the Virginia Tapestry, is a subhead there, so you can see that.
How did you become aware of the Native American community? I mean, you're involved in the Black community and you know that, but how did you really become more aware of another community near you?
Well, first of all, reading a bit and learning a little about the region, and there are unusual names around here, names of streets, names of communities. And I started looking and saying, what does this mean? And where did this name come from? And so I started going to some of the festivals. There's a park close by, and they did a reenactment of the Pocahontas wedding. And I thought, wow, this is right here in my backyard. Why am I not telling the story? And so that turned me on. So is living in your community, going out and about in your community. That's how I became aware of it. And just through folks, I made the contacts with her.
I mean, what are some of the groups, the voices that maybe people aren't thinking of in the South? That you've mentioned the main ones that you deal, but what are some of the little ones maybe that you haven't, that you started exploring?
I think because we cover a whole region, it's more a matter of where is any particular group. Like there are pockets of pretty much any marginalized community that you can think of in the South and throughout the South. And I think, you know, something that we do kind of differently is, you know, like we said earlier, like teaching journalists to be stakeholders in their local community. I think I'm coming at it from a slightly different perspective than Sundra, because I'm working with freelancers who are across the whole region, right? And so there's a different kind of mental math that goes into picking the right person to tell a story in a particular place versus you want to be the right person to tell that story in the particular place, right? But I think the biggest thing is kind of removing this veil of objectivity, right? And actually
we can get into discussion on that one. Okay.
Deciding to, you know, like we were saying earlier, like take an active position in your community, gain that trust of folks who are in your immediate vicinity. Because I think, like we were just saying, like the idea of giving voice to the voiceless, it's not that there is no voice, right? It's that the dominant media culture has willfully ignored that voice, or downplayed that voice, or buried that voice, or selected other voices that they think deserve to be heard instead of that voice. And, you know, I think when we're thinking about journalism as a tool in people's lives, that kind of, in the same way that removing objectivity is freeing, right? Removing the idea of agenda setting is especially freeing. You know, you go out, you are a reporter, you are literally reporting back, you know, you're not going out with a certain story or angle in mind. I think a lot of times when we talk about diversity and different entry points to a story, especially at, you know, big legacy newsrooms, it's because, oh, this story got scooped, we need a backup angle, right? We need another way into it. And that, from the start, you know, marginalized people should not be your backup plan. That should be your plan from the start. You know, for us, we are, you know, not a breaking news source by any means, so take some of this with a grain of salt, but we don't really care about being the first to tell any particular story, but we care about being the best at telling that particular story and providing that context and next steps and something useful and something new. And in a lot of cases, you know, it's honestly better if people already have some sort of background coming into it, because we can say, okay, you heard all of that. Now let's get into this part of it.
Suppose I'm a freelancer or work for some sort of publication. I am a freelancer, but I'm pitching this to a client or an editor. How do I make sure that the boss knows that this matters? I mean, you can sell it to me, but how do I sell it to when I want to sell it to a publication? How do I explain why this is important to somebody?
That's a good question.
And how do I make sure that I don't interview the same 3 people that I interviewed the last time I did a story on the environment?
Yeah. I think just positioning why you are in a special particular position to tell a story from the start. So by that trust that you have gained, you know, it's a special sort of access that you have to people and their words. You know, if you're going to the same 3 people about the environment every time, then everyone's going to have pretty similar quotes across the board, right? I think there's inherent value in saying, you know, these folks who I interviewed were really skeptical about talking to the media, but, you know, now we have that, we've gained that trust, and they have something that they want to get out into the world, you know, as opposed to kind of digging it out of folks.
Sandra, what are your suggestions?
Well, a couple of things. I think of the game 7 Degrees of Kevin Bacon. You all know what that is? Where you find out that everybody's connected to Kevin Bacon. If you think about the people in the communities, they've got connections. So you talk to Jill the plumber about the flooding and how you can prevent flooding. Jill, is she a mother? She knows other mothers. So when you're ready to start telling a story about mothers at a particular school who are against some sort of book banning or whatever, you might call Jill and say, hey, Jill, you know anybody? It seems like I remember you from, you mentioned your daughter goes to this school. Or if Jill is as a plumber, she has a business, she owns a business. So she very likely is a member of the chamber. She might be able to connect you with, you say to her, Jill, I talk to the same people at chamber all the time, but you must know some folks who are other business owners who we don't talk with on a regular basis. We're doing a story about this. Help me understand. So Jill is going to be your Kevin. She's going to connect you to so many people. And so that's what I do. I use people as not use them, but I see them as connectors. And every place I've gone, I have said to the people who I work with, and we're doing it now at the Chronicle of Philanthropy. I didn't start it there, but I'm glad to see it saying, you got to create a rich, diverse source list. And you keep that up to date. What we do is we put, if we talk with someone, interview them, they're a strong interview, they add much to our stories, we put them in this list and we note, in fact, we link to the last story we had with them. And so we know their name is in there, and a year from now, or 2 years from now, we might go back to them, but we're not going to go back to them immediately on the same topic again. So a diverse source list, a rich source list that's updated. But I tell you, it's a lot of damn work. Every month we have a meeting where we talk about diverse sources. And then once a month, we have one of our reporters sends out a reminder, have you updated the source list? So it's a matter of building really good connections, keeping account. It's the new Rolodex, I guess, like you said, Stephanie. And so it's keeping a list of those, and then realizing that people are nuanced and layered. And while they might be your source for this topic now, they are someone they know and help you connect with, can be a fabulous source for you down the road.
Okay.
Add something to that. I
Sure.
feel like I didn't give you a tangible answer earlier.
Well,
to the
I'm
earlier
still pondering the
question.
idea of making sure that I'm dealing with Kevin Bacon. You've got one degree, and that your sources kind of go beyond the one person you always talk to.
Well, I
like that
was just
image.
going to build on what Sandra was saying and say that there are experts all around you without institutional recognition, right?
That's a good point. Yes.
There are people who have, lived in this area for their entire life. And so they have a working history of, the local leadership, or they've been, affected by climate change, or they've been affected by a different policy or whatever. And I think that would be my tangible advice from the previous question of how do you diversify that source pool is, thinking of people who know and can translate and do some of that work I was talking about earlier, translate some of this for your readers, take the actionable chunks and say, well, the last time they did this 20 years ago, here's what it looked like, here's how it played out. If you're talking with just policy wonks or just experts or just, the quote unquote experts, the university folks and things like that, if it doesn't match reality, then it almost delegitimizes what you're putting out there, right? So yeah.
And it's building on the lived experience. You become an expert sometimes just by living it, and you can often speak more authoritatively because you're more authentic than somebody who's studied it over here at the university.
As a workplace writer, this sounds very familiar to me, because you look to hire someone and you say, gee, I can't find anybody qualified. And that means that they don't have the PhD, or they don't have this, and they don't have certain criteria. And then you stop and say, why did I need that to hire a person in that area? But how do you intelligently expand a criteria for an expert? I mean, how do you know when you're talking to someone that they have learned things, and how do you work through that?
I think part of it is a conversation. Yeah, it is. You people, and this is another reason why you want to get to know the community. People in the community know who the bullshitters are and who the experts are. They know the ones that are always going to pop up when they think there's a TV camera around. And they know the people who are out there doing the work every day, the community member who is consoling that mother whose son has been killed, and who can talk about why it matters, as opposed to the person who just pops up when the camera comes into the neighborhood. So I think that's part of it, is your connections help you understand and know who really are experts on certain matters. Obviously, when you're doing a story and you're wanting to quote some data and include that information, you've got to include that. Not saying that doesn't have a place, but many news organizations, the go-to is always the authoritative figure, the police figure, the top, what people consider the top, and they really, you aren't getting at the people who are living this and experiencing it, and who can be authorities and experts in their own right.
And I could give an example of that
Please,
too.
examples always work.
I was going to say, so recently we've seen like a lot of money coming from the American Rescue Plan Act that was intended to, you know, build back after COVID and all of these things with schools and whatever. A lot of that money has been going to fund police budgets, especially in the South, right?
Okay.
And so if you're about to tell a story about that, right, nobody's going to know what you're talking about when you talk about, you know, X% of the American Rescue Plan Act is being used to fund the police department, right? They're going to understand a story that is, these folks, you know, spent all of 2020 protesting against increases in police budgets. Here's how they're reacting to this news, which means that, you know, the police budget is increasing. Here's what that means on the ground for folks in your community. And, you know, like, just like I said earlier, like kind of digesting some of that and repeating it back to your audience in a way that it actually makes sense and is applicable.
They may not know the acronyms or the buzzwords or that sort of thing.
And if I set out to write a story about, you know, federal money coming into my city, my first instinct probably might not be to go talk to someone who was protesting 2 years ago for something. But if I, you know, take a step back, look at, okay, here's where this data is going, what implications does that have? Then that opens up a world of folks who can be experts in that.
Definitely.
They used to talk about in covering, you know, foreign correspondents parachuting into countries and not really knowing the background. It sounds as if this country might be diverse enough that maybe you shouldn't go parachuting into communities. You get a little background on it.
But it still happens a lot. Yeah.
Yeah.
The parachuting does happen a lot.
This is. And I'd like to hear a couple, just kind of ease into some stories about that show how this has made a difference, how this is, it's something that covering more than just the usual suspects really makes a difference in the storytelling and makes a difference to the people who are the audience for it.
Right. I've got one I can share. I mentioned the Native American community, but I was trying to think of examples that would apply to most of the region too. And if you think about it, almost every state, not almost every state in Region 2 has an HBCU, and that's a historically Black college or university. And if you watch, and I'm not down on television news, but if you watch television news, the only time you hear HBCUs mentioned are when there's a sports involved. And it happens in the newspaper too. They can tell you all about the basketball team, the football team at those colleges. When's the last time you covered their science department or their business department? I had spent a lot of time, not a lot, quite a bit of time volunteering at Virginia State University, which is an HBCU. I'm trying to remember how I went there. I went there because I knew someone who taught in the business school, and he asked me to come on a regular basis to speak to one of his classes. And so I got to know folks in the business department. And so just in talking with them one day, I learned that they were sending a contingent of, I don't know, I want to say 5 or 6, I can't remember now, 5 or 6 students from HBCU, business students, to China. They had never done this. It was an exchange program. Eventually, some of the Chinese students were going to come here, but there are 5 or 6 Black young folks who were going to China. Some of them, one young woman told me she'd never even flown before, and yet here she was going to Florida. She'd have a job there. She'd learn how business worked in China. She'd be able to share with them how business here worked. It was a great exchange, and it was a great story. I mean, you've got to look for beyond the obvious, and just keep your eyes and ears open, because the stories are there. And if we aren't sharing them, we're missing out on important, rich stories that represent huge parts of America. I keep saying I'm going to do it, and I haven't done it. I stay in contact with some of those students, but I really do want to get back with them and talk more deeply about what difference does this make in your life? What impact did it have on you as a business student and as a business person now? So the stories are out there for sure.
Yeah.
Tell some stories you've told or have had, that Scalawag's told.
Yeah. The first one that came to mind for me when I was thinking ahead of this conference was a story that we put out last year about the Crown Act in West Virginia. So that stands for Create a Respectful and Open World for Natural Hair. So essentially just policing of Black hair in public spaces and schools, and an effort to write into the law that all hairstyles are acceptable. And that's a policy that's been it's been added to the agenda, I should say, in a lot of different states. It's made some progress in some and not in others. But we decided to look at it in a state where Black policy is not the top priority so often for these Republican white lawmakers, right? And it did not pass in West Virginia. It did not, progress anywhere, right? But we still got one of our most well-performing, well-read stories out of it, even, in the wake of that not passing. It was that kind of exited the news cycle, because we were talking to folks who were leading the grassroots movement to end hair discrimination in the state overall, in particular schools, in particular workplaces. And, the impulse, if you're thinking about it from a traditional lens, might be, we're going to report on this bill, we're going to see who supports it, who doesn't support it. And then did it pass? Yes or no? But what we did was we worked with a reporter who is very well connected in her community in West Virginia. She, had these pre-existing relationships with the organizers who were in support of it. And we got them together at a Black hair salon, right before this bill was going to be passed, and just had them have a conversation. We took photos, we took audio, put together this whole multimedia package, and then, went back after the fact to add in, okay, it didn't pass, what's next? Because by the time you're there, you open up the door to so many other stories down the road. So there are, folks who were saying, well, okay, whatever, we didn't expect it to pass, at this level, because of course, but we already have plans in place for mobilizing at this, local level legislature. We're working, with this city council to try and get this passed. And, one of my favorite quotes that came out of that was one of the state representatives herself, who was on the side of bringing it forward, was talking about how heartbreaking it was, how she learned in this process that, Black women in West Virginia had to learn how to lobby for themselves. And so what we ended up with at the end of all this is a beautiful story, like a well-told narrative with human interest and also political, undertones and all of that at the end of the day. And yeah, I just think that that's like a prime example for us, at least, of why you need to invest the time in building these relationships and not say, oh, the moment's passed, or oh,
the bill's introduced, it passes or fails, and you're done.
Right.
Or this person was only useful for this story.
You got to get beneath the surface, because the stories are there. Just kind of have to dig a little bit. And I can't see the room. Am I looking? Oh, that's because I don't have that view on it. But I'm curious as to folks in the room, if they have, I'd like to hear some of their questions, and I know we kind of maybe jumping the gun, but what I
was about to say, do we have questions here? So let's do this. Let's get some questions.
Because there are experts, you're an expert on this in some way, you don't even know it perhaps, but a question and observations, I think, would be great.
Okay. So Dina?
Just to Sundra's point about Native Americans, yes, in Virginia, and in fact, the whole United States. I did a story recently for Richmond Magazine about census data, and I think because people were able to check two boxes or mixed race,
Right.
the Native American population like went up tenfold because people are Native and white. Black. Actually, it was I think a mix of Native American and Black that people were like accepting of that.
And did, yeah.
So many stories now.
Right. So wasn't there a big push to try to not include that mixed race box, if I remember? It's like you're denying people heritage by not having that. So no, that's a great idea, a great pool of information and stories that you might be able to do.
And it's why, just doing the census is a political kind of thing of being, wanting to maybe just sort of exclude certain groups, but the census data can be wonderful for finding, new different stories to tell when they're out there. Other, not just questions, but maybe some experiences people have had that are, Michael Pope?
One observation and a question. So the observation is recently I was thinking about the political experts I quote, and I thought, well, I need to diversify this. And so I called up one of the comms persons at Virginia Commonwealth University, who I happen to know, and this is kind of an uncomfortable conversation, but I said, do you have any political experts who are not white men? And he said, well, yeah, let me give you 3 names, 3 phone numbers. And so like later that day, I actually went over and I diversified my pool. So it was a difficult conversation, but it was worth having. Every university has a comms person. So like call up your comms people and say, it's a way to diversify my pool of efforts. The question I want to pose to you is, you mentioned piercing the veil of objectivity. Expand on that.
Yes, let's go there.
Or lifting the veil.
Lifting the veil.
That's what I said. No, yeah, I mean, just that's something that's near and dear to our hearts at Scalawag here. Do I have the sticker here?
Objectivity is bullshit,
Yes.
for those who can't read in the back. Objectivity is bullshit.
Oh, you want a
Okay,
picture of it?
I'm learning new slogans.
But
Did you bring those stickers from the lobby?
no, I should have. But I think, so what we mean when we say that is that, journalists are people, right? The ways that we tell stories as humans, it's inherently something filtered through a person back to other people. That includes certain pre-existing, assumptions and preconceptions and whatever lens it is that it's going through. And so I think for us, it's not about absolving yourself of your identity in that. It's about acknowledging it and embracing it and figuring out what stories am I the best suited to tell because of who I am as a person and because of like relevant to this conversation, like the access that I can have to certain communities over others or what have you. But yeah, like really placing yourself in that equation and not, playing to both sides, especially in the South, there's, if you're trying to include both sides on a lot of the issues that we cover, it would just be a total shit show. So,
and in reality, there are always more than just 2 sides anyway. So you get the both sides doesn't work. But Lovey, what back in the day, and it's now, but journalists, editors used to pound this objectivity thing into you, but they were already showing a bias by the kinds of stories they chose to let the reporters cover. They were not showing objectivity in this purest sense, which is impossible, but because of what they chose to lead the news with, what they chose to put on the front page, how they decided to relegate women's coverage to the women's section, how papers in Richmond and Baltimore and practically everyone in the South chose not to cover Black folk. So yeah, I agree with you on the BS. I wanted, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, and like you were saying, like it's not that you're objective just because you like have the dominant viewpoint, right? Like that means that you are subscribing to a certain set of beliefs and perpetuating that. And if that whole blank slate objectivity, could truly exist, then we wouldn't really need panels like this where we're talking about diversifying your sources and how to break out of that.
Yeah, I wanted to, before we go to next, I wanted to point out something that, was it Michael Pope? Oh, okay, I thought, okay. About, it was a difficult question to ask. We're having that conversation at the Chronicle about, because right now in COVID, even still in COVID, many of our conversations are by phone. And so do you just ask somebody, so what do you identify as? And certainly if you can start to begin to feel sort of comfortable doing that. But when you ask people to start identifying whether they're queer or gay or, it's like, how do you do that? And I think what we've settled on, first of all, the reporter has to feel comfortable, but you have to say, we are making an effort to be reflective of our community, to represent our community, our audience, our readers. And so that's why we're asking. And I think they appreciate that you're asking, and hopefully will be understanding and help. But it can be difficult, but it doesn't have to be if you explain, here's why I'm asking.
I have a follow-up question to that before Hazel does, because setting up panels for SPJ, we want diverse panels. I did one last year that someone criticized as not diverse enough, and I didn't know whether to say, well, yes, we did have mostly gay people on it. Was I supposed to identify or not identify? How do you do these things sensitively to the audience so that they know you're reaching a diverse without putting people into little pigeonholes?
Mm-hmm. I think it is the conversation with your source or whoever you're interviewing. I mean, some people may feel very comfortable in saying it and identifying themselves. Others don't, and you also have to be, as a reporter, as a journalist, be aware that just because, say a 18-year-old queer woman is comfortable with saying she is in the newspaper, is that also now opening her up to abuse or attacks? So just because someone says, okay, I'm fine in identifying, talk with them a little bit and say, hey, thank you for being willing to share, be aware that people are going to know this, and people will read this, not just here in Durham, North Carolina. People are going to read it all the way over on the West Coast, the East Coast. And so because it's online, more than likely. So a lot of it is just, I tell you, it's a conversation, it's talking about it. And was your panel, Stephanie, on about that topic, or was it?
No, it was about freelancing in some way or another.
Oh, okay. Yeah, no,
it wasn't. It was about.
It wasn't really
I think regulations.
Yeah.
So, but
no.
So I had no way of saying.
Yeah, I think that's a bit much, yeah, but
and I could remember the days of having to. I was supposed to ask, "Are you Miss or Mrs.?" And please. Okay, Hazel has a question.
It's more of a comment, but just would like to get your panelists and moderators reflection on this. Last year at the SPJ National Convention, there was a diversity panel that was all women. They were women of a variety of kinds. So in that way, the panel was diverse, but they were talking about how far we've come and carrying that on to how much further we have to go. And I distinctly remember one of the women on the panel saying, well, yes, we are in the room now, which is how far we've come. It used to be all or mostly white men who were there making, in the news meeting for the newspaper, making the decisions every day about what we're gonna cover, what's gonna be in the paper, what's gonna be on the front page. And a woman or a person of color would propose something, and the news editor would say, well, tell me why my readers want to know about that. And how far we've come is that women are now more willing to respond to that by saying, because those people are there. And your readers need to know that they're there.
Mhm, mhm.
Do
Yeah.
you think
I'm sorry.
come that far? And what's next? What's the next?
What's next? Okay, what's next?
I feel like that's still kind of assuming that your audience does not also consist of women in that case, or people of color, or that even if they're not in your existing audience, that those are untapped markets that could be in your audience were you to cover issues that affect your whole community. So I guess in that way, I think a lot of news outlets are still kind of catching up to that. They're scared of pissing off their fan base, right? They're tried and true readers who have been reading for however many decades. But in doing so, ignoring the fact that, most major cities got a lot of people of color that are also looking for news.
Yeah. I think if you look at SPJ has an excellent diversity toolkit. And I've forgotten who wrote the intro to it, but it's got a lot of good links. But it starts to talk about, or it does talk about, all the different reasons why it matters. And one of the reasons that usually will hit legacy newspapers or hit others is it makes sense business wise. And when you start talking to people about the bottom line, usually that's where they start paying attention. So that's one thing. And was your question, Hazel, what's next?
Well, do you think we've come that far now?
No, because we're still having the conversation. I mean, there's diversity and there's inclusion.
Yeah.
And having more diverse voices in the room is a good first step, but really having them in the positions to make decisions, to help shape the coverage, that's when I think we've made a lot of progress. I recently had brought to my attention by way of a family member that I'm not doing as much as I could be doing or what I should be doing when it comes to with people with disabilities. And then I pause because I think that is the best way to say it, but some people prefer other ways. But even, I brag about all the videos I put up and all, and then someone pointed out, I can't see your videos. What's going on in your videos? And so because there was no one that I was in conversation with when I was doing these, who had some vision impairment, I didn't think about that. Now someone's brought it to my attention, and now I need to figure out how to make it happen. So there are always ways that we can improve and continue to improve, and inclusion is the goal, more than just diversity across the line, across the board, in my opinion.
Other questions or comments? I'm trying to look toward the back. I thought somebody was waving, but no. Maybe we can go a little more into the idea of what's diversity and what's inclusion. How do you know when you've gone past just the diversity? What are some of the signs that you're making some of this progress that Hazel's talking about, that you haven't just gotten a little more diverse, but you've moved beyond that. What do you need?
I think something that stood out to me about what you were just saying was the idea of we're in the room, but you're still making these appeals to someone who is the ultimate decision maker, and maybe they have changed their mind on certain issues, or maybe they're more flexible, or they're lending more of that power to someone else. But I think that is still not it. That's still not a like Sandra was just talking about, having direct impact from input and voice and comments coming directly from someone who's in your community saying, hey, I need this from my news outlet or from my media sources, and you being in a position where you can be responsive to that and be in service of your readers, as opposed to trying something out, seeing if your readers like it, coming back and
The
seeing,
phrase you
yeah.
used was they were lending their power, and I think that's an
Mhm,
interesting
mhm.
to look at it. that-
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that.
You're not really able, you're not given the power, you're not taking the power, it's just sort of temporarily lending. That's an interesting distinction. I think that's good. Sandra, do you want to
No,
comment on?
I think it's been used many times before, but whether you're invited to the dance and whether you feel comfortable getting up and dancing like nobody's watching, that's diversity versus inclusion. If I can go and feel like I can be myself, my whole self, no matter what it is, then I'm feeling included. And I think just to say, oh yeah, come on to the dance, but then I'm on this side of the room and everybody else is on the other side, that's not inclusion. So a trite way in a way, but that begins to help explain, I think, some of it.
Looking around for other questions or comments, or what? I'm trying to think of what I'm going to take back from this. I'm a freelance writer, so go ahead.
I've always worked for legacy news, or the business argument. A story like that is never going to get the clicks. Don't waste your time. I don't want you wasting our time. How do I respond next time says a story like this isn't going to get enough clicks to make it work?
It's not going to get the same clicks that you're used to getting, for sure, but I feel like until you actually test that out and make sure that you're doing it in an actionable kind of way, like there's no way that's a correct argument that they can throw in your face. Like if they've never done it, they don't know. And if they also haven't ever done it before, then they don't know that they're going to do a good job at it the first time. So the first few tests or what have you, before you actually are embedded in these communities and making good use of your resources, like even that I would just kind of throw back in their face as like, of course it's completely different from what we've been doing up to this point.
Yeah, and also, so I think I can only hear part of the question, but was it about getting clicks or not? That story's not going to get clicks.
How will we, we won't get clicks, so don't waste. He
So
started by saying, don't waste my time, but don't waste the company's time, essentially,
Okay.
doing that.
So I'm going to be real, and I can say this because I've walked the walk. If you're at a company, a newspaper, a news organization that doesn't have the same values you have about covering your community, you need to leave. If they put clicks on stories, page views above reflecting their community, as I said, based on everything research, they're not going to be in business very long anyway, as far as being in business. But there's the moral, the what's right thing, and many of them are never going to do what's right, and those are the ones you say, thank you, I've enjoyed working here, or you don't have to say that even. But
I need to say that.
Thank you, I found another job. And so but also, and I know because I've been editors, like I say, in many places, try to work with the person, try to say, well, let's just give it, like Lovey said, let's just give this a little bit of a try. Let's see it and try to move them along. But if they're not moving along, if they're not willing to do something that reflects the coverage area, then And that's something, if that's something you value, then you need to go where your values are represented.
And
Can we applaud her? Yes, you can applaud her.
that's
Great. One of the things you mentioned about moving along, we're going to have a session, we have 2 sessions coming up after this, but one is about different new forms of media. And it's something that we talk about a lot in SPJ, and we've talked a lot in the freelance community because we want to work, is that there are a lot of things beyond the legacy media now, and which ones will stay and which ones won't, we don't know. But there's the whole thing of what's the business model is changing. And so I think legacy media is aware of that and should be more aware of that. There are other places to go, and there are other ways of telling stories now. I just read an article a day or so from the Post, the Washington Post. People had done a story or were invited to write in on, they named their baby one thing and they changed the name. And they just got a bunch of examples. And somebody in the comment section said, I notice all these people are in their 60s and changed their babies' names, like 30 years ago. That's odd. And I thought, no, it's not. That's the readership. I think you have to be aware that, yeah, you just keep getting the same clicks of an audience that is literally dying off. That's some kind of business model. Okay, I think Hazel.
And I speak again.
Oh, you may speak again, yes.
I would like to speak again about freelancing. It's really hard to walk in and say to the news organization that's hanging your way right now, I'm going to go out on my own. But I personally believe, and now listen, I'm an old retired lady who freelanced at the beginning of her career before a lot of you were born, and then again at the end for 10 years at the end of her career. The world is changing, and there's going to be a place for freelancers in journalism. And if you really want to make that work, you're going to do 2 things. One is you're going to find a way to pay rent, put food on the table, do what you need to do. And you're going to carve out a period of your time to freelance and do important work, do work that you want to do. You're going to find Scalawag. You're going to find publications that rely on freelancers because they want the diversity of voices, because they want everybody's story to be told. And you're going to go and tell those stories. And eventually, it's not going to happen immediately. You're going to still have to rely on that job that pays the rent and puts the food on the table. But eventually, if you're really good at it, and you can be really good at it if you're a good journalist, you're going to be in a position like Stephanie's in, where she's been paying her bills freelancing for, I don't know, 15, 20.
I've lost track.
I understand.
Dina.
And you're going to be able to look back and say, I've done some really important work. I'm glad I got here. So that's my pitch for freelancing. Join us in the freelance community and get involved. You can help make things keep getting better because you're going to keep finding editors like Lovey, who has made a point of hiring freelancers in her business. And you're gonna make it.
Dina?
I thought your point about changing names was more a social point about at that era, maybe people had given their children names that were more ethnic, but they needed to change them to be more American. I didn't think the story was going to go in that direction.
Yeah, it was just, I think, a light feature. But what it revealed from the people who wanted to comment on it. Yeah.
In terms of like diversity, this panel's topic, like I think you think like every year, some publications run like most popular names, and that, I think that shows like more like who are we?
Mhm.
Who do we need to be reporting about, and how do people view themselves? Are they comfortable giving their children names that reflect who they are, or like maybe that was going on in that generation. They weren't so comfortable. I don't know. It made me think about all this potential for reporting names and identity.
Names and identity,
Mhm.
and also realizing, I'm originally from the flyover zone. There are large sections of America where I would say there really isn't much diversity. And I don't think they're aware of just reading the list of names with, of the popular baby names. It's like, that shows you that America is more than you see in some of the small white towns, that are really narrow in their focus.
Yeah.
The world's bigger.
Yeah. And
Go ahead.
I want to make sure that we're not just, and I know we aren't, but diversity is more than just race and ethnicity. In Loop City, Nebraska, there probably are not very many Black folks, but they're very close to a Native American reservation. There are, while there's a very Polish community, there are others who come to town and bring things to it. So I want to make sure that wherever you are, whether it's Loop City, Nebraska, or Detroit, Michigan, to look for diversity of all kinds. I heard a story, and I just caught the last part on NPR this morning about, I forgot even what town. Oh, Cincinnati. They have a school for rabbis there, and because there's been such a small need or whatever, they're getting ready to close the school down. I would have never thought Cincinnati was a hotbed of rabbi teaching. You just don't know until you go there. Is that rabbinical? I guess rabbi teaching is how you say it, but rabbinical. But there are stories outside the normal, what we've seen of all kinds. And I think I just encourage people to look for those and make sure that is as broad and as reflective of the community as possible. If you noticed, Hominik is not a good old Southern East Tennessee name. I'm married to a guy who's part Polish, part Russian. And so I have learned about the Polish community more than I would have ever known. And as long as we're open to those ideas and talking about them and say, okay, here's what else I need to learn, or who else I can represent, I think we're going to be okay as journalists, as long as we're keeping that open mind to do those things. And it's tough. And as far as the changing models, look, every day there are nonprofits that are opening, that are launching, that are doing things differently that give me hope. And I am also hopeful when I look at the young journalists who are coming into the business. So if we continue these conversations and keep moving ahead, I think we're going to continue to move in the right direction. I have to be optimistic after all these years.
Optimism is good, and I think probably a good note to kind of wind up on if there are no more questions. Thank you for bringing up, Sandra, the idea that, yes, diversity is a lot of things. I recently discovered, and I'm going to write about this, but back in where I'm from, there in northeastern Indiana, there's a large community of people from what used to be Burma. It's perhaps one of the highest populations in the country or something, and you find different people come to different parts of the country, and there's a lot you can find out. So you can't have assumptions.
And also diversity of class,
Class.
diversity of
Yeah,
gender
exactly.
identity,
Class.
sexuality,
Sexuality,
disability.
class.
Yeah.
That there are many kinds, and I think that's something that we keep reporting on. And I'm glad Sandra's optimistic. Are you optimistic?
Think
Please
so.
be. Good.
Think
Okay.
so.
Good. I think we will end on an optimistic note then. We have a couple more sessions, and then this evening We have Beth Macy's presentation, the author of Dope Sick. That's coming up yet this evening. I want to thank everybody. I want to particularly thank the people from Radford and Virginia Tech who've made this possible with all the technology. This has been
The
this has been a fun
technology.
this has been a fun experiment, and I'm glad it's almost over, though. Thank you very much.
Thank you all. See ya.
Yay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Take care.
Awesome.